1989, the pinnacle of all rifle development, the Delta Carbine.
And 2024, probably like the pinnacle of Instagram hype beast.
Aha!
Many things are different, but if you look at the height of our optical setups,
Same,
they're shockingly similar.
same, but different.
So, guys, welcome to Midway USA. I'm Josh.
My name is Henry.
We're with 9-Hole Reviews, and today we're going to talk about optic height. On the AR platform, the carbine, sort of like the fighting carbine specifically, because if you were to look at these two things and the height of these optics, you'd kind of just think to yourself in a vacuum, well, this just must be how it is. But as many of you already know, optic height has changed very much over the last 30 to 40 years. Well, call it 30 years. And in that period of time, we somehow circled back to be at the same height we were when we started.
Right, now, I will say this off the bat. You'll get a lot of people on the internet who say, well, it's cyclical, it's going to bounce to and back. I disagree with that. I think we're learning more and more about different techniques of shooting these things and realizing that this height is actually advantageous in certain scenarios. Whereas Delta absolutely had its reasoning on going back to a cheek weld with a co-witness height. Now, I was not Delta, let's make that clear. I was military, definitely not Delta. I collected these things, and when I was in the military, this was the cool. This was what I was used to. Now,
Block
this is
one, right?
pulled off of an MP5, so it's a little shorter, but close enough to an M16A CCO, little shorter on the sight height. But this, the Block 1, was what we all saw during the Geo-Ot era of the pinnacle of the development.
And I suppose, if not that, then
the Block 2.
something like this, right? The
Yes,
Block 2.
which is also co-witness height. Now, what are we talking about co-witness height and sight height? Just to lay it out there, the sight height is how high, essentially, your sights are in correlation to your bore being the barrel.
Quick editorial note here. Henry's reference of the sight height being the difference between the center line of the optic or the sight and the bore of the rifle is mechanically correct in terms of what matters from a ballistics perspective. But commercially, it's much more common to see mount height or optic height described as the difference between the optic and the receiver top. So when you hear a 1.93 height mount, for example, that's the distance between the optic and the receiver top, not the bore. Keep that in mind. Let's get back out to the range.
Now, the AR-15, compared to a lot of other rifles, is already higher on the sight height. So the big controversy, if it is a controversy, would be what happens if you stack even more height to it? Does that turn into something absolutely ridiculous? Does that turn into something unmanageable? Now, Delta back then, they were actually experimenting with newer sighting systems to guarantee performance in the field in stressful situations. And so during the 80s, late 80s, the Aimpoint became something that was highly prolific. And you could see that it guarantees a decent hit rate with a fast trigger pull onto a target. Now the bottom line though, Delta still saw that there was something not really matching, I would say. And a lot of us during this era, all the way till when I was going through initial entry training, we were from the M16A2 era. So I was used to good contact with a butt stock and nose to charging handle looking through the iron sights. Of course, this is where the iron sights are. And if you're running just an iron sight rifle, there's not a lot of different ways to shoot this rifle. Delta put this here not because they recognized that this was the ideal sight height, but this was the method of mounting any type of optic.
So a
for that era.
constraint in this case of necessity of mounting it at this height based upon the mounting systems, again, whether it's the carry handle mount like we have here or even some of the original like arms or other rail systems, which are some of the developmental cycle stuff back in the early or mid 90s, I suppose.
Correct,
right?
yes. So you saw the Black Hawk Down is a very prolific time of Delta. You'll see a lot of them shooting these carry handle sights with a optics on top. Now it looks cool to us now. Again, it was kind of nerdy back in my day, because they were recognizing you were doing chin welds with this, so you had less control on recoil with a rifle. And so
less consistency with your head placement.
Correct. Right? So now when you're talking about how did they solve this, there were two ways, essentially. One way was to adopt what's called a gooseneck.
Mm-hmm.
So you drop the sight up here, but that gets rid of a lot of space up here that you could be mounting like a PEC 2 or a laser unit, which is useful for the We Own the Night generation.
Right.
Now, as we progress from this, Delta started cutting the carry handles off of these things, maybe right until where the rear sight was,
mm-hmm.
and they would bolt pieces of weaver rail onto the top of this by the armor. And what that generated was essentially you drop the sight lower and you were able to shoot the rifle like we were all trained with the M16 system. No surcharging handle, good cheek weld, and this is what came of the M16A4 era of shooting this rifle much like how you were trained on the M16 system, but having a sight here and having an open rail on top to mount any lasers as needed. This, in the traditional method, still gave you a good shoulder weld, but at the same time, what a lot of, I would say, civilian shooters recognized this before military, was that you were craning your neck down. And what the military realized is if you were wearing body armor, this was a really uncomfortable method to retain for a long period of time. And so what we used to do with a stock, with a AR-15 stock or the M4 stocks, you would use the very tip of it and lay it on the little pocket of your shoulder, still get the cheek weld, and basically do entry like this.
So you were going back to a more head up.
Correct. You're raising this back onto a heads up method of shooting, and running the tip of your stock on your shoulder pocket to achieve that heads up shooting. Now, why though? Because when you have a heads up shooting, you're not tunneled down. You still get a decent peripheral vision as you're moving forward. I would say that is not necessarily a regular soldier's problem, but more so with special operations guys or infantrymen who are breaching into certain spaces.
Yeah. So to just give you a visual of what Henry's talking about, if I've got the gun up like this, I'm going to use no gun here so you can actually see what my head's doing. And this is going to change depending upon like my physical body, like how long my neck is, how big like my shoulders or my pecs are, or whatever. Right. But generally speaking, if I'm shooting with a lower mounted optic, like an absolute co-witness height, even sometimes a lower 1/3 optic mount, I need to press my head down, and in some cases, depending upon where I'm putting the stock in my shoulder, whether it's high like Henry just demonstrated, or down further, like deeper into the chest or into the shoulder pocket, I might even have to tilt my head forward and angle my eyes upward to be able to see down the optic. And there's some trade-offs with that from recoil control standpoint, but moreover, the second that you're like leaning your head forward and flexing your eyes up, it starts to be, in my opinion, a very unnatural and unwieldy shooting position. So there's a balance there between, well, we want a stronger, more adequate cheek weld, which is something that even in recent times, Kyle Lamb, who's probably from Viking Tactics, who's one of the more prolific, outspoken people from that era, I'd say, in a social sense, he has gone on podcasts and had conversations where he talks specifically about how important it was to drop the optic down a bit so you could have better contact. Right. So you have that in one camp, and then the other camp saying, well, if I want the stock lower in my shoulder pocket and I want to sort of be wrapped around the gun a little bit more, then I find myself really having to dig my head down and look out the top of my eyes, which I heard that referenced by Jerry Mikulek.
Okay.
At one of the matches I was at with him back in the day, or like 2010 era.
I do want to make a distinction that for what we're talking about here is for AR-15 carbines, specifically for the fighting carbine, 0 to 500 meters maybe, with a preference at the 0 to 200 contact. So this is a priority towards the closer range engagements with an ability of stretching far. If you're shooting precision rifles, a high mounted optic with low cheek weld is actually a little bit more difficult shooting from, let's say, prone positions, but could be advantageous from other positions. Now, that being said, what is the actual trade-off to mounting these optics high or low when it comes to the mechanical use of the firearm?
Well, what you just referenced about the precision setups or precision carbines or even precision rifles of some sort, it's a good carryover into this conversation, which is when you increase the height of the optic above the line of your bore, you introduce some interesting complications. And this is the primary mechanical influence that is changed or that optic height has on how the gun is going to act. Not an ergonomic thing. All the stuff we've been talking about cheek welds and stock plates, it's all ergonomics. The mechanical difference has to do with the arc of your projectile flying to the target and how your optical sight is zeroed in relation to that arc of the projectile.
Right.
The long and short here is that you have to be much more specific about where you zero your optic as you increase the height of the optic. Whereas with an absolute co-witness, you can kind of zero wherever you want in terms of like a 25 to 300 yard zero and everywhere in between. And for the most part, you can find a workable, semi-workable zero.
Right.
The problem is when you increase the height, the higher you go, the more angle you're applying to the arc of the projectile in relation to your zero position. So what that ultimately results in is that you have to have a zero that's like closer to a 100 yard zero in order to not have a ridiculous min-max in terms of where your projectile could be above the sight in the 0 to 250 yard pocket. So if, for example, we take a 25 or a 30 yard zero and we use a very tall sight height, you can be like over a foot high when you're shooting at like 150 yards, right? So there's a lot of tables and graphs that show all of this stuff. Jimmy Rodriguez and Joe at Bruiser have a great video on this if you guys are interested in getting into the specific nitty-gritty on all of that. But that's the main mechanical thing you have to be worried about. After that, and that also comes into like close range offset as well, like the offset or height over bore. After that, it's really ergonomics. So Henry, where does that then translate to what you're shooting today on not a clone rifle,
Right.
but like your go-to rifle?
It hurts to say that this is a clone rifle. Because
Yes,
this is
the clones, the Block 1 and 2 clones.
Because this is what I know. But now, okay, so what I was talking about earlier, when we wanted to make it work in clearing rooms, you'll see a lot of us not getting full contact on the stock and basically bringing it up. You see I dropped that one shot because I actually overdrove it down. What I'm actually doing right here, you'll see that I'm getting a lot of up and down movement because I'm not sinking a lot of that recoil into my shoulder. Now, that may not be an issue at this distance because you're still hitting the target, but I'm certainly getting slower splits as I'm running the rifle. Slower splits meaning I get more time in between shot to shot. Now, if I'm using a higher bore axis or a higher sight height, I'm actually able to bring this back into my shoulder. And I've got a much faster, the rifle recoil is sinking into me a lot more, and I'm taking that recoil and I'm driving it back onto target much easier. So what Josh is saying on the rifle mechanics, of course, everything still works like a rifle, but what it does is it positions the rifle in your body to actually shoot up close a lot faster and a lot easier, and it gives you better peripherals as you move forward.
Right, I think it's important to note here that what Henry is describing can also be done with a lower height optic. I can still put the lower height optic in the pocket of my shoulder, okay, and not have it stepped up a la old school GWAT sort of room clearing stuff.
Again, that is me.
But in doing this, in order to see through the optic where I might normally be like this and sort of pressing with like the side of my chin, my jawbone, and like the lower portion of my cheek, now I have to drop my head and angle forward. So you can absolutely still get a really
Yeah.
effective positive cheek weld using a lower, a stock position, as well as cheek weld using a lower optic height, but your sacrifice is this forward angling of the head.
Now, I would say that may not be a thing on the flat range, but when you're wearing body armor all day and you're on the 60th room that you're clearing, that drives a bearing on your physical status. And so that's why you started seeing soldiers doing this as they're clearing rooms, because you're tired. You get very tired shooting that way in the long term.
And again, I think what's key to talk about here, or just to mention, because I'm going to just draw one point of contrast here, is the shooter's body type matters a lot in terms of how high and low the optic can sit, and to be able to effectively get behind it. So you can see some of these big hulking dudes who have tall mounts and can still put the stock over their shoulder and just shoot like almost purely heads up.
Because their shoulder is increased.
Their shoulder is ginormous. Increased. Yes, they have a huge trap, right? So again, let's get into, just really quick to wrap this session up. If you guys are new and you haven't tried all these different optic heights, which are the ones that we think make most sense here?
So for me, I think one of the easier ones to sort of accommodate everybody is the lower 1/3. It's essentially co-witness, and again, co-witness meaning naturally on an M16, it is designed to shoot at this iron sight. Co-witness means it is exactly on the same plane. Now, lower 1/3 means that the optic is raised slightly to where it is on the lower 1/3 side of the plane. What that does is it gives you enough height to use the optic at a higher position, right here. But at the same time, if you want to, you could also put your cheek down and still use the lower position of the optic to accomplish the same thing. So that's a nice universal way of mounting optics. But if, like, say Josh has rifles that he likes to dedicate a little bit more towards short range and run a little bit faster at a dynamic course like this, what would you do?
So my ideal, what I recommend to people, is either lower 1/3 or a 193. And I myself have gravitated towards the 193. This is a 193, and I'm good with doing it on LPVOs. In fact, almost all of my LPVOs are now on 193 mounts or dots. And I think this is, for me, the perfect middle ground of sort of being there. I'm not getting a full cheek weld, but I'm getting like a chin, lower cheek, like chipmunky portion of my face. And I am able to, effectively be very comfortable getting a full purchase on the stock, happy with where this all is, and be quite effective like that. Again, 193 for me.
Now, one thing with 193s, you raise it back up. One thing that you could sort of cheat the whole cheek weld thing, you can get cheek pads that give you a little bit more cheek weld there, if that's what you're going for, I would say.
To Henry's point, like, there are some setups like this one. This is the Unity, I think this is 2.26 inches, so quite high, in line with more of like the old carry handle. And this is probably taller than what most people should get at their first one. But yeah, as Henry's pointing out here, it's designed to be shot over the top of the aiming unit and to be used with a night vision device of some sort, where you're more heads up because you have tubes sticking off of your eyes and you can't bury your head into the gun, or else you're going to hit your tubes into the gun. So, again, it's more, I think the 226 stuff is a little bit more specialized. I gravitate to around the 193. It wasn't always like that. I shot absolute or like 1.5 inch height sights for a long time because it was what we learned on.
Everyone started, well, for our generation,
that's
everyone
what I mean,
started on the full co-witness.
For reference, that's this height, right? Correct. This is one and a half or so. And again, you can still do it, but it requires that driving down to the head.
Now, I would say, if you're looking for something that's a little bit, and this is going outside of the scope of what we're talking about, but still worth a reference, if we're talking about something that's a little bit more of a more precision and longer range oriented system, I actually like to keep the sight height a little bit closer to a lower bore axis. Not super low, but lower. It's something that I've shot a lot of, let's say, precision, like Remington 700s, precision rifles. The body mechanics of that mimic the lower bore height. for precision stuff.
Well, and I think that's a great point. If you're spending the majority of your time in the prone position and you got something like a 193, you're going to spend a lot of your time craning your neck up
which is
and back.
the opposite problem of what we're having on the short range.
Exactly. It's just an inverse, right? Because that's just generally how it works. So I think that the lack of a cheek weld, this is coming purely as my opinion, as a better than average carbine shooter. I think it's massively overblown when you're shooting 5.56 guns.
Okay.
If you graduate to battle rifle stuff, that starts to matter a lot more, in my opinion. As long as you're getting some good jaw contact on this thing, you're good to go. Where this starts to get cumbersome and where I draw the line is if we were to look at, say, something like this, which is a micro dot inline, this is the quintessential setup, right?
Right.
When I look to go through this dot, I'm on like a full chin weld. Like it's not a jaw line, it's not lower cheek. I'm like on full chin, and this is where I start to not feel super comfortable with a height of this sort of depth,
correct,
if you will.
Now, as we close this out, I would say, if you're very unsure of which sight height you want, there are certain type of mounts, let's say like this Aimpoint mount, which you could stack the height, the spacers on the bottom, in finding your different type of sight height. Primary arms optics typically come with different spacers, and you could get one of those sights to sort of figure out which type of sight height you want to work with on a range like this or on a more longer distance range before you commit to something that's a little bit more permanent, like Josh's Badger Ordnance or Unity mount. But again, the options are out there. Midway has an extensive catalog to look through. We have taken liberty of this catalog and decked a lot of our rifles out, as you see. But as far as now, do you have anything else, Josh?
No, guys. If you like the video, make sure to comment below. Let us know which sight height you're running on your carbine build. And until next time, we'll see you on the range.
716, this is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, red con 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over.